Today we're going to make a costume for Wendy from Fairy Tale. I decided last minute to go to MetroCon, so I'm going to use some reclaimed fabrics and get that 3D printer going so I can get this done in a timely manner. Let's start off with the arm and ankle cuffs. This is a perfect part to use the 3D printer for because it is the same piece repeated 4 times. So I'm going to start off with a paper mock-up so I can get the shape and size right. Then I'm going to just take a photograph of that and scale it in Photoshop. Then move over to Illustrator to go ahead and sketch it out and create an SVG. Now because this is symmetrical along the central axis, I really only have to get one side right, and then we can just mirror that over. This is a perfect time to revise that paper sketch into something that's got more even curves and whatnot, and then just get the thicknesses right on the armband. Once we have the SVG, it's easy to import it into the 3D design software and then just extrude everything up. I'm keeping the band and the lobes, I guess you could call them, as separate pieces because I want to be able to have them at slightly different heights and modify them separately. Now we could just keep this all flat and boring, but where's the fun in that? So let's take it over to Mesh Mixer. We're going to do a Voronoi pattern. So first of all, we just got to modify that mesh a little bit and give it some more triangles that are kind of bigger, but not so big that they're across the entire, well, it looks like fingers now, but once it's looking okay though, we can just go ahead and cut it in half and then mirror it so it is symmetrical. And then I just had to kind of fiddle with it again a little bit because some of the parts where I cut it didn't quite work out. That's fine. We can just kind of smush them down a little bit. It's all good. Now we can go ahead and take this back over to put it together with the armband. I don't like the solid background there. I wanted to have cutouts in those whole areas. So I'm going to go back to Illustrator and create a slightly smaller version. It's just easier to do in here than in 123D Design. So then just take that SVG over and extrude it up and then just subtract that out. So now we have central cutouts, but a nice solid border to keep the Voronoi pattern enclosed because the edges aren't the prettiest and they're fairly irregular. So also need to add some holes here so that we can add straps later on. It's a lot easier to add them now than have to cut them in later. Now I'm just scaling this pretty much as big as would fit on my printer. I had to scale it down just a tiny bit. And I'm also cutting off the bottom a little bit because I don't want any parts kind of floating in air. That part from Mesh Mixer wasn't really flat on the bottom at all, which is fine. I mean, I could have cut it in there, but I just didn't want to bother because I knew I was going to be cutting off the bottom in Cura anyways. Just got to check those layers and make sure everything's going to print okay, and then we're going to go ahead and just give it a go. I'm going to use some PETG here. I was thinking of using the flexible filament like I normally use, but I just wanted to see if maybe the PETG would make it a little bit stiffer so that they have enough body to stand out as opposed to just lying flat. I will say this was a little bit of a pain to print. It kind of didn't work a couple of times and I came back to some spaghetti. It just kept wanting to come up from the bed because there are a lot of parts that aren't really very thick on the bottom, and it got a little goopy and it was sticking to the nozzle, and I think it was mostly just this particular filament wasn't working too well. So I would say probably not the best choice, but this will work. So I needed 4 of those, got those all printed out. Now let's get some straps going. So I'm just using this reclaimed fabric. This used to be cushions for a sofa, so thank you, Travis, for providing that nice fabric for me to use on this costume. And I'm just going to trim out 2 straps for each one. Now we need to make these curved so that they can fit onto your arm and your ankle. So I'm just using the heat gun to kind of heat mold these a little bit. It works very much just like foam. So no big deal, just be careful not to get it too hot and scorch it because it will turn brown, and we definitely don't want these to be brown. We need them to be nice bright white. This was a lot more annoying than I was expecting. It really didn't want to heat mold round enough and small enough, but I got it done in the end. Sometimes you just have to fiddle with stuff until you make it work. Let's sew those straps on. Now the holes are perfect, so all we need to do is just stitch the strap through those holes and around a couple of times with some, well, I'm just going to use some hemp thread because that's what I have, and I'm, like I said, mostly using stuff that I already have because I'm getting this done in just a couple of days so as to have it ready in time for the con. And I'm just poking the holes through because it's too hard to stick the needle through this fabric. It's really quite tough stuff. It's not a leather, it's sort of a leather type product with this flannel type backing. It's a really great fabric. It's nice and sturdy, and I think it's going to be great for the dress, although it's brown, so that's okay. We can take care of that. Just wait and see. I stitched it around 3 times on each one and it's super secure, so we're good to go. I would have liked to do maybe something with buttons so that I don't have all these long straps hanging out everywhere, but I did not have time. So I will go ahead and do another version of that later on. and just do a little update video as to how this could have been better if I'd had a little bit more time. But this will work in the meantime. So I'm just tying everything down, and these will just wrap around your arm or ankle so that they stay on pretty securely. And then just repeat that 4 times. We're going to make the dress now. So I've got a big piece of this scrap fabric that used to be the seat cushion, and I'm pinning it on inside out. Now this is a great technique. It's sort of like slip covering your mannequin, and this is just a body cast mannequin that I have that kind of is my body shape. It got a little bit distorted in the process of making it, but it still works fine. So pin it all on inside out and just fiddle with it until you have the seams in the right spot so that it fits. These types of dresses I've noticed tend to fit poorly in the back when they're not properly contoured. So I've got a seam in the back so as to give some extra room there, and then of course the seams on the side so that it can be fitted to the waist. This is a really sturdy fabric. It does have a little bit of a stretch to it, not much though, and it is pretty forgiving as to how it's going to fit, so it's a great option for this dress, and it was free. I'm going to place the zipper at the back seam where I think it will be least obtrusive to the pattern on the dress, stitch up those sides, and it will be perfectly fitted hopefully once we turn it right side out. So I'm sketching along all of those pin lines so that I still know where everything goes, and then just take out those pins so that it can be taken off of the mannequin. And you can see how that's going to work once you flip it right side out. But we do need to trim along these seam lines a little bit. There's way too much fabric in some areas. Obviously you don't want to trim off too much at first because you want to make sure that you've got everything placed correctly. I am going to do a little bit of work on these side seams because once I flipped it in half and compared it to the placement of the back seam, it wasn't really placed in the same spot on left to right, so I just put some pins through on the side I liked best so I could trace the same pattern onto the other side in the same spot. So now we know that it's going to be pretty much symmetrical. We can go ahead and stitch these together. So just pin it in the center point there, and we'll stitch everything so that our seams are held securely. The seam along the bust line was actually already there. I just used the existing structure of the seat cushions, so that was pretty convenient there. Now that the side seams are stitched, we can again just trim off some of that excess, and we'll want to try this on to make sure that it fits okay. But that looks pretty good. You've got the curve in at the waistline, so that's going to be a nicely fitted dress. And now we need to go ahead and sew in a zipper. The zipper was salvaged also from those same seat cushions, so I just picked out all the stitches and it was in perfect condition, so this is going to be just right for the back seam. So I've flipped down those raw edges and just pinned it down to the zipper. We're going to be top stitching that. I'm going to do a couple of lines of top stitching to make sure that it's secure and to keep the edges from sticking out funny, hopefully. You do have to fiddle with it just a little bit to make sure it's placed right, and then I also did try this on too before stitching it. So I top stitched the zipper. I'm refining the edges of the side seams. The tips were sticking out a little bit funny, so I had to kind of go back in and just revise that a little bit to make sure it's not only symmetrical but also curves properly around the hip area as opposed to sticking out in a little poochy bit. And I think that's looking pretty good now. So we can go ahead and continue with the more decorative, less structural part now. We're going to give this that blue and yellow scalloped edge that gives the dress that distinctive look that you recognize from the first time that you see Wendy. And I did fiddle with this quite a lot to get the placement right. Now I wanted the scale to be appropriate to my size. And then also around the sides, you have a little bit of an awkward area where if you continue the same size scallop, you're going to end up having half a scallop in certain areas. And if you were using a patterned fabric, you wouldn't really have a lot of option there. Your pattern just wouldn't line up particularly well. But since we're going to be painting on this pattern, I have full control over where my scallops end and what size they are. So for the front and back areas, I want them to be the same size and spacing pretty much. But for those sides, I'm going to kind of just fudge it a little bit and do larger arcs as the pattern progresses down to the hips. So at the top, it really is just the same size scallop as the rest of it, and then it just gets slightly larger as we go down. You don't notice it too much, but when I did it the first time without doing this way, it did look pretty awkward. So you can see there, I just kind of scribbled that out a little bit and redid it with this nice large arc on the side. For the yellow part, I just have some acrylic multi-surface paint. It works fine. This fabric isn't too porous, so I didn't even have to put anything between to keep it from going through the layers. That backing on the fabric makes it nice and sturdy, and it doesn't soak the paint up like a lot of fabrics might. So I did have to do a couple of coats on this. I didn't want to do too much because that would make it kind of crispy and uncomfortable and scratchy. So 2 coats of the yellow was just about right. It's not a solid fill, but I don't mind that. It's sort of got a distressed, weathered look that is interesting. For the blue scallops, I decided to go with a fairly dark blue. It's not exactly as it's pictured, but I like the look of the dark blue with the yellow. I'm going to take that yellow one step further though. Even though it's supposed to be just plain yellow, I want to make it a little more gold because I think that it's going to fit better with the fabric that's underneath, kind of blend everything into a more cohesive look. So we're just going to do a single coat of gold acrylic paint over top of the yellow. And it's fairly subtle as you see it in the video, but it does make a big difference when you see it on. It just looks more right for this particular version of this costume. And it's nice to be able to take liberties with these costumes. It's just like another form of fan art. You don't have to follow the picture exactly if you don't want to. And I don't want to, so I'm gonna do even another little thing that, you know, is not in the picture, but I think it looks nice for this version. I'm taking a light metallic blue and just sketching over the edge of each scallop. It defines it a little bit better and makes it have a little more depth with that dark blue transitioning to the yellow. It's, again, a subtle little detail, but I think it looks nice. We do need to add those triangles to the top and bottom. For the bottom ones, in the picture they're flat, but I wanted to try making them a little more three-dimensional, so I created this paper pattern that will allow them to be more of a pyramid shape as opposed to a triangle. We'll see how it works. To give these some body, I'm using a canvas for the internal part, and I'm going to cover that with some regular old cotton fabric like you'd use for patterning. I already had both of these fabrics on hand and they work great, so let's go for it. Just trim out a topper piece of the cotton and pin it over. The canvas has that nice stiff edge that makes it easy to pin against. And then we've got to stitch together that little central part though so that it does have that pyramid shape once you unfold it. Definitely got to trim the seam though so that it lies more flat. Once the pyramid shape is established, we can just top stitch over those edges so that it's nice and neat and held in place. We need to do several of these. Then once you have a whole pile, go ahead and place them out on the dress so you can figure out exactly what the spacing needs to be, and then we're going to stitch them together in a long train. I've overlapped the corners of each diamond just enough to have enough area to stitch it down so they stay stuck together. This is going to make it much easier to place them on the dress than if each one was individual. I first top stitched it in white after I pinned it to the dress, and then the edges just are looking a little bit bland, so I'm adding a decorative stitch in a color that matches the light blue metallic paint that I did on the edge of each scallop. I'm still not terribly happy with that though. It looks a little bit too country, but for now let's just get those diamonds standing out properly. Now the pyramid shape kept wanting to sink in a little bit. I stuffed a piece of tulle behind each one and then also glued a piece of craft foam to hide those raw edges, which I didn't think about at first, and then as I was creating the dress I was like, that needs to be covered. Then to just kind of neaten it up a little bit, I'm stitching some cord over top. This was left over from the Reapy Cheap costume. So I had enough to go all the way around, and I think that looks a little bit more finished and appropriate with this version of the costume than the blue top stitching did. I was really running short of time here though, so it needed a little bit more stitching, but I got it on there. It's just not quite as straight as I would have liked, so I can go back and fix that later. We need to make straps though for this dress, and I'm using the same technique of the piece of canvas with the cotton over top. Just fold down all those raw edges and give it a couple rows of top stitching. Now we've got to find the right placement for the straps, so I did try this on to get approximately where they need to go, and then just laid it out on the table to pin them so that they are symmetrical across the central axis with the zipper as a reference. And then I'm just going to do a couple rows of stitching over that to keep it sturdy. Now we need to create the diamonds for the top part of the dress. The ones along the collar I'm just going to do flat. I'm not going to try to do them three-dimensional. I think they would just get in the way. I'm again cutting that out of the canvas first, and then just rough cutting the cotton around that. The edges are going to all be folded down and top stitched in place just like with the hemline. And we're also again going to sew them all together in one long row to make them easy to work with for placing them on the dress. I did lay these out on the dress first to make sure that I had the placement approximately right and the correct number of them so that it would finish at approximately the end of a diamond around the zipper so that the pattern wasn't ending in a weird place. Once I had these all sewn on, I tried it on and realized that my diamonds were, again, just like the bottom, kind of flopping over instead of standing up. So I glued craft foam to the insides of each of these, and that made them nice and upright. It also, again, hides those raw edges of the fabric, and I would have preferred to do this with fabric, but I was very short on time, so craft foam is a quick solution, and it does give it that body it needs to stay vertical as opposed to flopping over. However, in the area under the arms, I took a little artistic liberty here and made it a little more practical and just folded those down, because really it's not the nicest thing to have a diamond sticking up into your armpit. Now we need to make the bow. This is super simple using that same cotton. I've made it 3 layers thick by creating a tube that has very large seam allowances that then fill the entire inside and create that 3rd layer. So we just need to stitch together the center line and then put the seam at the center. Stitch the edges, but leave a little hole so we can turn this right side out. And now we have this tube that has the seams all hidden, and it has the right amount of body with the 3 layers of fabric. And then we just got to top stitch those ends so that it stays closed. And now we just got to tie it into a bow. The key is just to make it so that the ends come out the same length and the center looks nice and the right side of the fabric is facing forward on every part of the bow. But this was actually really easy to do with the fabric version of the bow here that was stitched with the 3 layers. That worked out quite well. And now we're going to stitch that onto the center of the front of the dress at the collar line. Stitching through this fabric is a little bit difficult. It's very sturdy fabric and it's got all those diamonds with the foam in the way. But it's on there now, so the final thing that we need is shoes. And I've got these kind of older shoes that have stripes that obviously don't match, but we can just take that same paint that we used on the dress. I'm not too worried about covering the stripes completely. I actually like a little bit of visual texture showing through. So I'm going to do 2 coats of the yellow, 1 coat of the gold, same as with the dress. I quite like the hemp edge and the kind of whitish border on there. They worked out pretty well, and I think I like them better than before I painted them. And that's it. It's done, and it was finished just in time. I got it done the night before the con. I got a wig online, and it was fantastic, although it was a little bit of a challenge to get those bangs trimmed decently. They were really long, but that's perfect because that gives you the opportunity to cut in the style that you want. And yes, I'm totally wearing glasses with this costume because I don't have any up-to-date contacts prescription, so glasses it is. The armbands and ankle bands were easy to tie on. I will say that the ankle bands kept wanting to slip down, and also after wearing them for a while, the plastic did start digging in. So I think it would have been a better idea to use the flexible filament. It would have been easier to print and more comfortable to wear. So I'm going to do a little bit of an update later on to show a better version of that, and with better fastenings and a more comfortable print, and maybe just clean everything up a little bit once I have a little more time. But overall, everything worked out quite well. It was comfortable to wear. I didn't have any issues with any part of it other than that little bit of discomfort with the cuffs, which I'm going to fix. Everything was done in time and no stitches popped. My shoes were comfortable and the wig stayed on pretty well, although it did get a little bit itchy. I think I needed maybe a second wig cap or something. We had a great time at MetroCon with our little fairy tale team. We saw some interesting people there, as usual. There were lots of cool booths, and there was some medieval sword fighting. I had a lot of fun with this costume and this character, so I hope that you guys enjoyed the creative process as much as I did. If you haven't already, take the plunge and subscribe, because I will have lots more videos coming up with regards to cosplay and 3D printing and anything else interesting that comes along in the maker world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon!